Coming up, Cam Thomas signs his qualifying offer after failing to reach a contract agreement with the Nets. Is this the end of his time in Brooklyn? I'll dive into that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is closer than you think, and right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel.com app to get started. And on today's show, it's an emergency podcast because Cam Thomas just signed his one-year, $6 million qualifying offer after failing to reach an agreement on a long-term deal with Brooklyn. I'm going to be joined by an NBA insider to react to the news, detail what it means for both sides, and whether we ultimately feel it is the end of Cam Thomas's time in Brooklyn. Joining the podcast now, we got Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto. And Scotto, we have breaking Nets news this morning. Cam Thomas, his free agent stalemate with Brooklyn, finally coming to an end as he signed his one-year, $6 million qualifying offer. According to Shams Charania, and setting the stage for what went down here, we've heard obviously about the negotiations and there being a big gap between the two sides. But Shams reported on the heels of this that Brooklyn's offer to Thomas included a 2-year, $30 million deal with a team option in the second year, and also a 1-year, $9.5 million deal with incentives up to $11 million, but he would have to waive his no-trade clause. And with him accepting this 1-year, $6 million qualifying offer, he will be an unrestricted free agent next summer. He also has a no-trade clause during this season. So in the lead up to this, following this and now him finally doing it and taking the qualifying offer, just what was your initial reaction to the news?
Well, Erik, I felt like we were headed this way for a while with Cam Thomas and the Nets, just in the sense of I had never heard they were going to offer more than 2 years. I had heard for a long time 2 for 28, which was about, pretty much around the mid-level. Shams had 2 for 30. So that, came to fruition as far as like an offer. But the team control on year 2 was a must for them. They're in a complete rebuild right now, and so they want the most flexibility possible. What I think is interesting most of all, Erik, is that when you look at last year, when we were at Media Day, I'd asked Cam Thomas, do you feel like you've done enough to be a part of the core? And at that time, he said yes. And so he comes in, he plays 25 games this year. He had multiple hamstring injuries, but he scored and he was decently efficient, which is, pretty much what he does. And so then that didn't materialize to being a core guy. You look at the draft they had, they took a bunch of players at the guard spot, 5 total first-round picks. It's clear they're kind of shuffling the deck a little bit here, and where Cam Thomas is in that pack really is up in the air, I think, at this point long-term.
I wasn't surprised at all by this news. I thought that it was always a possibility. Like, I thought that, I had questions about whether Cam would actually go there, but I'd said, it's a risky gamble, but if there's ever a player who would be willing to gamble on himself and has that level of confidence, it is Cam Thomas. But I'm not surprised. To me, this is an admission that the Nets don't value him as a core piece moving forward, and they don't view him, as a starting caliber player in the rotation. And the reporting had been, at least from what I'd heard, leading up to this free agency and into it, was that his camp came into negotiations with, allusions and comparisons to guys like Jalen Green, like Jordan Poole, Emmanuel Quickley, those young guards who had gotten paid $30 million, in annual salary. And with the Nets being the only team that has cap space this offseason, that just really didn't come to fruition. And I've said that, there's been this discourse that the Nets aren't going to bet against themselves. And even though they're not offering him a ton, they don't have to, they could still value him. But I had pushed back and said that if they're actually risking him taking the qualifying offer and they're squeezing him down to the point where that is a legitimate possibility, to me, that is an admission that they do not value him as a core piece moving forward, because the qualifying offer is a bad outcome for both sides, in the sense that for Cam, it means it's a massive gamble. He's playing on a 1-year deal at $6 million. He's passing up. He's not getting a significant payday. And for the Nets, when a player signs that QO, they usually are gone the following offseason. And the Nets also don't have, they can't trade him. They can trade him, but he has a no trade clause. So they lose leverage there. It's just they're not retaining him as an asset. And that, to me, is a signal that really wasn't too much of a priority. To you, do you feel, we're getting a lot of questions off the heels of this, like, what does this mean? Why did he do this? Do you feel that this is a signal that this is the end of Cam Thomas's time with the Nets? Because that has been my read, if he takes the qualifying offer, that he is going to be gone.
I think when you look at it, if the Nets viewed him, like you said, as a long-term guy, you would have did a multi-year deal, whether it was like a 3-year deal, 4-year deal, something like that. Clearly, they haven't seen enough to value it more than around the mid-level. And so I took a couple things from this. One, Cam Thomas thinking that he was worth more than the mid-level, certainly around the league, wasn't coming to fruition. He's now banking on that next free agency, he will get either the mid-level or more at this point. There are teams that at this moment will have that cap space and availability. But then you go through the trade deadline, teams could absorb contracts and fill up some of that space. It's not a lock. A lot of times now people don't want to get to free agency. For guys like Cam Thomas, Jonathan Kuminga, and, we'll have to see what happens with Josh Giddey and Quentin Grimes, this is a shift. What we're seeing right now is a shift. A lot of times people going into restricted free agency just kind of take what they can get. They're betting on themselves. And in terms of his future or not with Brooklyn, it's hard for me to say that I'm not as confident that he's going to be there long term now after this. Because if you're Cam Thomas, you're looking at this saying to yourself, they had a shot to give me a multi-year deal. They didn't really want to give me anything great. That tells me all I need to know about them. And if you're Cam Thomas now going into this year, I think the most minutes he's played the past 2 years is about 30, 31 minutes. I'd be shocked if he's getting more than that. If anything, they're going to try to curtail that to either give them the best advantage to keep him long term on a reasonable number. You're not going to let him just like go off completely. I don't think there's the possibility that could happen. Why would you want to let him boost his value that much that then you would lose him possibly for nothing? To trade him now, the ball is in his court.
Can I push back? I think that's a double-edged sword, though, because it's going to be interesting. We'll talk about this in the next segment about what does this mean for Cam's role this coming season, because you just said, why would you let him go off to a point where he's boosting his value and it'll be more difficult for you to retain him? I'd also say, though, if he does go off and he does play really well, maybe they get something for him in a trade, even though he has the no trade clause. They could find a deal maybe with the team where, because perceivably he's going to want to leave, I would think, after this. I don't even think, like you're saying, why would they let him boost the value to the point where they want to retain him? I just don't think that the Nets are in on Cam Thomas. I don't think that he's their guy, based off of let's just look at the actions. How long have we been going through this with Cam Thomas? It was understandable at the beginning of his tenure with the Nets when they didn't play him because they were looking for more complementary 3-and-D pieces around KD and Kyrie. But then they trade KD and Kyrie. He still didn't play during the second half of that season when they desperately needed scoring, with Mikal Bridges and Dinwiddie and DFS and Cam Johnson, those guys. He was still glued to the bench. They only really played him when they absolutely had to. And then, up to this point now, they have a chance to lock him down, and they didn't do it. I say actions. I've said actions speak louder than words always with NBA teams and front offices and players. And I'd say in this case, I think we have actions and words that both signal that the Nets just aren't a Cam Thomas team. I mean, the actions being they didn't offer him, a significant contract, and they let him take the QO. Also, they just made a draft where they made 5 first-round picks, all of which were, high-feel, pass-first guys. Sean Marks gave us a quote. You were there for that press conference after the draft saying, we want to play 0.5-second basketball. The ball doesn't stick. All guys who are bigger, multi-positional defenders can make it tough on defense. None of that. As soon as I heard that quote, I was like, I think Cam Thomas is gone, because none of it matched the way that Cam Thomas plays or the way that it seems like the Nets want to build. And now they're at a point where I just think that, this signals the beginning of the end, whether he leaves in free agency or whether they get, whether they get something in a trade for him. But we do have an interesting question about, was this a mistake for Cam Thomas to take this QO? How will this affect his role this coming season? There's going to be a lot of questions about what is he with the Nets moving forward. So we'll dig into all that after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, you use FanDuel. It fits however you like to bet, players, props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live action as it unfolds. It makes every game even more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. And lastly, it's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets podcast, talking with Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto about Cam Thomas and his decision to take a one-year, $6 million qualifying offer and pass up Brooklyn's offers. Just refreshing the listeners, Brooklyn's offers were reportedly a 2-year, $30 million deal with a team option in the second year and a 1-year, $9.5 million deal with incentives up to $11 million, but he would have to waive his no-trade clause. And Cam passes up on those, and he chooses less money and keeping his no-trade clause and pretty much keeping control of his next team moving forward. So when you look at Cam Thomas and that decision, do you think that this was a mistake by Cam Thomas and his camp? Do you think that this was a mistake by the Nets? What's your opinion on the way it shook out and kind of how Thomas's representation approached this?
No, I don't think it was a mistake by Cam, because my thought process is he valued instead of valuing the extra $3.5 million on a one-year offer, you don't know what the incentives are. He'd rather just have control over his future and where he could end up, which for a young guy in his position entering unrestricted free agency, that matters the most. So that's the way I looked at it from there, for sure.
And I also, it's interesting because I think we need to talk about the 2-year deal and the 1-year deal separately. I think the 1-year deal speaks more to what I was saying before about the Nets maybe, wanting to move him or wanting to get out of the Cam Thomas business because they offered him. I mean, they do need to spend more just to reach the salary floor, but the qualifying offers 1 year, $6 million. They offered him an extra $3.5 million, pretty much almost as like a bribe to waive the no trade clause, because they would be able to move him freely then and have a little bit more leverage in negotiations. So to me, that is a signal that they could be looking to trade him this coming season. And Cam obviously was willing to give up that $3.5 million to have full control over his next team, because Cam, that's the biggest takeaway from this, is that Cam has full control over what his next team is going to be. He has control over where he gets traded this coming season, and then he's an unrestricted free agent next summer and can sign wherever he wants. But I think the 2-year deal is kind of interesting because
if you're going to trade him, though, I feel like you got to put him with somebody else's salary. Like, he doesn't make enough money in my view right now. Like, who are you going to get back that makes it kind of worthwhile, or even a young guy you want to look at maybe down the line? I think you're putting him then, if you're going to trade Cam Thomas and you're the Nets, I think he's an additional piece to a bigger package.
He could be, yeah. Like, you could definitely aggregate him with other contracts. He would obviously have to agree to it. But I also think, like, this could just be something where they trade him for another expiring for a couple of minimums just to make, salary fillers to make it work. And they get like a 2nd-round pick for him. And I know that might sound crazy to some Nets fans because they perceive Cam Thomas as this, maybe star level player or approaching that. But you've probably heard similar things. I've heard from people around the league, like the Nets have never been offered a 1st-round pick or anything significant for him up to this point. And if they had been, I think they would have jumped on it. And that just hasn't been the case. And the market isn't there for him. If we're talking, let's talk about the 2-year offer now from the Nets and like whether I think Cam Thomas made a mistake financially. I think financially Cam Thomas may have made a mistake here or misplayed his hand, because if you're talking about and financially and what he wants, like financially isn't always the biggest factor in some of these situations. Like, I'm not just going to act like that's all that Cam Thomas is prioritizing. But from a financial perspective, if the Nets offered him a 2-year deal at $15 million annual salary, he took the QO at $6 million. So he sacrificed $9 million. That means next offseason, he has to get a contract with a starting salary of $24 million to make up the difference of what he lost. Is he going to get a contract starting at $24 million? I'm
not banking on that. No.
Yeah, I'm just not sold on that. And some people might think he is going to, and Shams put it in his article that, a lot of the team, like 10 teams in the NBA project to have cap space next summer. And that's great, but we've seen it. That cap space and that money dries up real quick in this new CBA. Like, guys are signing extensions. We'll see how many teams actually get into the offseason with cap space. And then from Cam's perspective, I'm just not sure what the appetite is around the league for him, because you look at these other restricted free agents, like, say, Jonathan Kuminga or Josh Giddey. Even though there was no cap space around the league, we did hear reporting that other teams inquired about sign-in trades and were willing to give those guys significant contracts. And up in Cam Thomas's case, there's been no reporting of any team that's come to the table with interest. So, what do you feel about his market next summer? Because I said, if he has to make $24 million next offseason to, the season after next to make up for that.
I don't see that. I don't see all the Net fans on Twitter that were like, oh, this guy's a $30 million player. Or like, I remember Dennis Schroeder one time was like, this is a max guy. I was like, what are you smoking? Like, no, that's in what world? The market's got to be there. The market hasn't been. Look, here's the thing, Eric. Here's the thing. This is what Cam Thomas did, okay? He got an offer that wasn't great, and he said, all right, Sean, hold my beer. That's it. And I understand why he did it. The Nets had always said the whole time they anticipated he was going to come back. He's back. It's not a great situation, I don't think, in terms of, like, if you're Cam Thomas right now, there's no way this guy's going into camp happy that he had to take a 1-year qualifying offer. Let's start there, all right? So for the guy, that had so I remember when he was asked, why don't he smile? He's like, well, ain't nothing funny. So it's definitely not funny now. So if you're Cam Thomas, you've got to go into this season changing some narratives. People think you're just a scorer, even though, he's had some games where he's had 5+ assists, whatever. He's got to, try to change a narrative. I think he sees the writing on the wall the same way that you do. Brooklyn probably isn't it, because if it was, they would have came to a longer deal. With the new CBA, it's interesting that these teams, whether it's Golden State with Kuminga, Chicago with Josh Giddey, Philly with Quentin Grimes, everybody's debating, how much of a percentage of the cap is a guy worth versus is it worth it to keep this guy or just move on quick? And it's like, look at Chicago after doing the Pat Williams deal. Now they're playing hardball with Josh Giddey, who starts for them. It's like this new CBA has made teams penny pinch more than ever, by far. And we're really seeing that. So for Cam, he has to get more than, from his perspective, he has to get a mid-level or more next year, or else then this was all for naught.
Yeah, and even if he gets the mid-level, he's sacrificing, as I said, $9 million. It's a lot of money to give up for a guy who has, he's a late first-round pick up to this point, has not gotten a big NBA payday. And I said, I thought he made a mistake from a financial perspective. I think he's going to end up losing money from this. But that's not always the biggest thing. For Cam, he might value, he clearly does value controlling his destiny, controlling what his next team is. And maybe he thinks if he can get to a situation that he deems more desirable, where he'll have a more consistent role, he can make up that money in the long term by increasing just the perception of what he is in the NBA. But I would say that he's going to have to do a lot to, change that perception. And I just recorded an episode yesterday talking about the Nets players with the most to lose or gain this coming season. And I said Cam Thomas, and you just made the point, which was a great point. The ball's in Cam's court. I mean, there's two things up to this point in his career that he hasn't been able to do. It's play defense and it's make his teammates better. The defensive end of the floor, he's been a glaring negative. I think he had the third worst defensive rating in the NBA among players to play 25 minutes per game last season. And then, from the playmaking perspective, I threw out a bunch of stats in the last pod. I'm not going to go through them again. He just has not been a willing playmaker up to this point in his career. And we've seen it, with the market for these guys. I went through it yesterday. You talk about Colin Sexton, who the Jazz had to attach a second-round pick to get
Jordan Clarkson. Sure, keep going.
Yeah, Jordan Clarkson, Norman Powell, Anthony Simons. There just is not a market for these smaller score-first guards who struggle defensively. It's just not an archetype that's being valued in today's NBA. So
not like Jamal Crawford and Lou Williams. The narrative has shifted. If you don't shoot, and I've had this conversation with executives on team building. If you're a two guard that doesn't shoot a high percentage from three, as like a 3-and-D kind of guy, or moves the ball, and you're just a scorer on like average to below average efficiency, those days of those guys getting paid because of this new CBA are done.
Yeah, and you made the point about this new CBA causing teams to penny pinch and count every dollar more than ever before, and that's because with the aprons we effectively have a hard cap nowadays. So that every dollar is counting so much more, and that's why you're seeing. I understand Cam Thomas's frustration because he's probably coming in. He's looking at Jalen Green, who I think he's as good a player as up to this point in his career. That guy got $30 million. You look at Jordan Poole, he got $30 million. You look at Emmanuel Quickly, all these other guys, whoever you want to say, and he's going in.
Well, here, let me just say one thing. Jalen Green got paid to be traded. That contract was structured that way to be traded. Who'd you mention after him? Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole was coming off a championship. That's why he got paid.
I understand. But
quickly, Toronto, gave up OG Anunoby for him. That contract now looks like a miss.
And that's completely my point. My point with all of those guys is Jalen Green got paid to be traded. You talk about Poole, he had a valuable run with the Warriors, as a bench piece and a part-time starter, Quickly, whatever. But you talk about all those guys were paid in the prior CBA. And Cam is coming to the table with comparisons to these deals. And if I'm the Nets front office or any other front office, I'm saying, are those deals I want on my books? No. Those are not contracts I want on my books in this new CBA. So that's why I'm skeptical about the market. I think from a financial perspective, Cam may have overplayed his hand a little bit here. And I think that there's also an interesting conversation of how does this affect his role this coming season with the Nets, and how does that impact what his next contract is going to be. So we'll dive into that, what the expectations for Cam are this coming season, how that could affect his market moving forward when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, we have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you all for helping us out. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking with Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto about Cam Thomas's decision to take the qualifying offer, his inability to reach a long-term agreement or a short-term agreement with the Brooklyn Nets in free agency. And Scotto, we were just talking about whether it was a mistake for Cam Thomas to take this and pass up on the Nets' biggest offer, which was a 2-year, $30 million deal with a team option in the second year. Cam has full control now. He'll play the 1-year, $6 million out. He has a no-trade clause. He'll be in unrestricted free agency this coming season, and he clearly thinks that he's going to be able to get a deal that makes up some of that and where he gets to a better situation. But, with Cam being on this deal, I think it's a signal of, him probably moving on from the Nets after this season if he's not traded during the season. And with the Nets being in a rebuilding year, it's really an interesting position because now what incentive do they really have to play Cam Thomas and put him in a featured role over some of these other guys, especially these rookie guys that they just drafted? If they're going to lose him anyway, they may still do it, but there's definitely less incentive now for them to do that than there was before if he would have taken this 2-year, $30 million offer.
Yeah, I mean, look, you make 5 first-round draft picks, the kids are going to play. So for Cam, I just think Cam is however many minutes he gets, he's scoring that many points, just about. Like, Michael Porter Jr. is going to lead this team in scoring. I think this is the YOLO year for Michael Porter Jr. For Cam, he's going to try to make it that, I think. And maybe at the start of the year, maybe the first 10, 15 games, he still gets that opportunity. But eventually, the trajectory is going to shift towards the kids and the development, because that's it.
And I think the only incentive, like if you're asking the question that I just posed, like what's the incentive that the Nets have to play him? The only one that I could think of is that
to trade him.
Yeah, like that's
you play him, but that's why I was saying like the first 15 games, maybe even 20. A lot of teams do that in the beginning of the year, and then it's like you try to give them their value because long term what you're going to do with the guy. So they're like, all right, play him. The way I see it with Cam is like the Nets are looking at him like, even if we play this guy 30 minutes, not going to win a lot of games. So play him, let him put up his stats. Maybe we move him, like you said, either as a contributing piece to a bigger package. If you're moving him just by himself, maybe you're taking a chance on somebody else that was a former pick and you get a second-round pick or something else back, maybe. You would need a team, in my opinion, that's either a lottery team that thinks like he could flourish with them, or if you get a team that's a playoff team that's desperate for scoring off the bench, and that, hey, he's coming here, different role, but you're going to play and you're going to get a chance to score off the bench. I think for Cam, eventually, like that's going to have to be a little bit of a mind shift for him, because this is a guy that was a star, like Oak Hill, LSU, was an elite scorer, always used to be in the guy. And in the NBA, it's a different shift from what teams are asking for him. And I do think the mental aspect of that for him is going to have to be adjustment. And just being around these young guys and being a teammate, like the body language, everything's going to have to be there. Teams monitor this stuff as well, too. All of it. All the background intel, everything comes into play.
And I think it's interesting. I think you make a great point there about, maybe him getting like a 15, 20 game runway in the beginning of the year with the Nets having the intention of trading him. Look, if I had to make a guess, like I think that's where this is heading. I think it's heading towards a situation where he's going to play in the beginning of the year. They'll give him his featured role. Maybe he can build up his value somewhat, but I think they end up just trading him for whatever they can midway through the season. And, maybe that's earlier, at that December 15th date, like we saw with Dennis Schroeder last year. But I think that he's going to get traded. And I think that with him having the no trade clause, the Nets will be able to work with his representation to find him a trade to a place where he deems desirable. And that might be difficult because up to this point, there haven't been a ton of teams that have shown that much interest in him. But if you can bring him in, if you're a team, like you said, who needs scoring off the bench as a playoff team, like if you can just add him for basically nothing, he's a guy who could be valuable during a playoff run, because we've seen, like we saw it with Jordan Poole. Like Jordan Poole was a valuable piece to that Warriors finals team coming off the bench for a lot of those playoff games. And I think Cam would have to shift, obviously, like you said, how he plays, but there could be value for him. But I think it would be in a much more minuscule role, obviously, than what we've seen. But I just, me just reading this out and just smelling it and reading the tea leaves, I think it's trending towards a trade.
I think you got a good sense of smell.
Yeah, and the last thing that we'll touch on is, I just do think it's interesting, for Cam, because I said, I thought he made a mistake financially, and I think that what I just said, I think he's going to get to another place, because I just don't think that the Nets have really any incentive to play him the entire season over these other kids that they just drafted, or over anybody really, especially if it's helping them win more games than they would, just because they lack so much shot creation in other places. And if it's affecting his role for the entirety of the year, that's going to affect what he's going to get, obviously, in his next contract. So I think a trade earlier in the season, when they're able to, makes the most sense, because he gets to a fresh situation where maybe that team has more incentive to play him. He obviously can showcase some more things, and that'll give him an ability to recoup some of the money that he lost. But it's going to have to be a mindset shift, as you said. Like when you look at Cam Thomas this coming season, do you think that, we'll get to a place where he's, actually willing to reevaluate and do some of the things that have been the knocks on him? Because up to this point in his career, it seems like he's really been in that mindset of what you said, like, I've been the man, I can be a star level guy. Like, I asked him late in the year last year after he was ruled out for the rest of the season about how he feels about what he's done. And he said, I feel like I've been one of the best guards in the NBA at my position when I've been given an opportunity. So I think that clearly shows where the mindset has been. And I think there might need to be a little bit of a shift.
Cam Thomas is going to do what Cam Thomas does. I mean, it's just there hasn't been a shift otherwise yet. Why would it be now? I think he's going to go into the year, have a featured role in the beginning, and then it's going to dwindle down. But when he has the ball, it's built in his DNA. Like, all right, Erik, I don't know what hospital Cam Thomas was born in, but like when this guy came out of the womb, I think like before they cut the umbilical cord, this guy made a shot on a Fisher-Price hoop. You know what I'm saying? Like this guy was born to score. It's what he does. It's what he does. I promise you there's a need for that in the NBA. I just think the evaluation he has and what the league has, you're like Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan Bridge, a little different. We gotta get somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah, and I agree, but I think that takes a certain amount of self-awareness that, I just don't think Cam has always shown up to this point in his career. So is he going to be able to reevaluate, and is he willing to listen to some of these things? Because like we had Zach Lowe earlier in the offseason say that the narrative surrounding Cam has been empty calories ball hog. And that wasn't, Zach. I didn't read that as Zach saying that. I read that as Zach saying, this is what I'm hearing from other people throughout the NBA.
Correct.
From front office executives. That is the consensus. That's what Zach said. And Cam comes back and Cam says, F you and F the consensus. So we're talking about self-awareness and a willingness to reevaluate. I'm not sure Cam has shown that up to this point in his career.
I'm not Pablo Torre as the chief investigator, but I wonder if Cam tweeted that or somebody else that maybe has access to his account. But nonetheless, either way, he certainly doesn't agree with the narrative. I'll say that, but I'll say that he's changed a little bit of the narrative in the sense that, like, there was some guy, like, previously in years, everybody's like, no shot. Now, at least some people can kind of talk themselves into, like, well, if he's willing to come off the bench and be an elite scorer on, like, a good team, yeah, there would be a role. That's going to be up to Cam mentally down the line. For the first 15 games, it's Michael Porter, Cam Thomas time. And then after that, it's time to rock the cradle. We're going with Yeager Demon. We're going with, probably you'll see some of Ben Saraf. You're going to see some of these younger guys, the Drake Powells. These guys are going to play. They're going to play.
Yeah.
So,
that's why
Traore as well. Like,
yeah, that's
where it's going.
That's why I think a trade, makes the most sense earliest in the year. But I do think it's interesting because, as you said, their NBA teams are going to be monitoring everything. They monitor body language. They talk to other teams. They talk to people, scouts throughout the league. And Cam Thomas, I think, is probably coming into this season not pleased with how this played out. He obviously did not want to take a 1-year, $6 million qualifying offer, while he looks at all these other guards throughout the NBA who have been paid. And he's coming into the beginning of the season. He's going to have to sit down in media day with all of us. He's going to have to talk about all this stuff. And he's been a guy who I think it's sort of just his affect, but body language, I think, hasn't always been great in the past. So I'm really interested to see, how the dynamic between him and this Nets team and him and this Nets locker room that features 5 rookie first-round picks, like, how does that play out in the beginning of the season? Like, what are your expectations? Because it's going to be really interesting to monitor.
Combustible gasoline. You think Cam Thomas is here to, give Drake Powell, like, the baby bottle of Gerber food and be like, this is how you're going to take my job? No. He's here to play. He's here to score, and he's here to get his next deal. That's going to be his mentality. This is going to be a fascinating, fun locker room. Michael Porter Jr. has been completely, unhinged. Like, this guy was in Denver. Yeah, he would have some random quotes once in a while. This guy's on a run for the ages. I mean, like, I don't know. They're not going to win a lot of games, but, like, the quotes of the year are coming from that Brooklyn locker room at this point. Like, there's going to be stuff to write about for sure. And, you know, I just think of, like, the "are you not entertained" meme, because that's what we're going for that. Like, Michael Porter Jr. is going to unleash. Every time he gets it, it's going up. I think he said the other day, too, he was like the second best shooter other than Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Okay. Jordy's going to be like, "Brother, go ahead, shoot. Go ahead. Yeah.
I love when you try to do the accents. I think you're Sean.
Jordy,
Mark
well, because Jordy, I remember the person, with the rest, I'm fighting for my life. you got him with that. We've gone a long way. You had, like, Avery Johnson back in the day being like, "Well, we got Brooke Lopez. We don't need Dwight Howard. We got Darren Williams now, our point guard. I'm going to elevate him to a champion." Then you went from that. I'm trying to think. Lionel Hollins was just monotone all the way.
We're just getting into Nets accent history now. That's what we're going through. Scotty, you might have another career, man, as an NBA impersonator. That could be another lane that you could potentially get into.
I know, but no, man. Look, it's going to be a fun year. It really is, and especially, like, getting ready for media day. Like, I can't wait to hear what Cam Thomas has to say about this. Especially when a year ago, he was saying, like, "Yeah, I feel like I've shown enough to be a member of the core." Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to say the least. And for a writer and a podcaster like myself, and like you, covering a tanking and rebuilding team, there's some storylines that are attached to it. It's all you can ask for, and it's going to be interesting to see it play out. And Scotto, appreciate you as always. If you guys don't already, follow Scotto on Twitter. His handle's right there. Go check out his stuff on Hoops Hype. Does a really great job. But we got a lot more to cover with Cam Thomas and a lot of other situations. And I'm sure, we'll circle back and have you back on, man. So appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime, brother. Glad you're having a good summer. You got a nice tan. Let's rock and roll in a couple of weeks. I'll see you soon, brother.
That does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Scotto, hitting on everything involving Cam Thomas' situation and him taking that QO. If you guys enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you have a second, smash that like button. It really helps with engagement in the algorithm. I'd appreciate it. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Cam Thomas taking the QO. Let me know if you think it's the end of his time with Brooklyn. If you think either side made a mistake, I want to hear from you on all of it, and I'll try to respond. But we got a lot more coming up with the Nets. Training camp is rapidly approaching, so I'll have all that and more when I'm back on Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.